to be moving forward, Nick, with our second question. It does seem as if it is coming from an estate agent. It goes as follows. We have listed a property that is registered as a residential with no business rights in the natural person's name on a regular mandate. The tenant is a juristic entity, which is a creche, and which will be trading from the property. Apparently, though, there are businesses all around the area, and so this shouldn't be an issue according to the agent, of course. The landlord's daughter, however, has come forward requesting that they should receive a commercial lease. It is, however, the assumption of the estate agents that this should be actually on a regular natural person's residential lease. Nick, any advice towards this question?
Okay, so interesting question. There's an assumption that the estate agent makes in their question, and unfortunately, assumptions are very dangerous when it comes to law, and it's one thing that we look out for and we try avoid at all costs. So this property, this estate agent tells us at the start, is registered as a residential property. It has no business rights. Okay. I don't know what the specific code for this particular property is. We don't have it, but for those viewers who may never have come into contact with this, the properties that are allocated in South Africa all receive an allocation for what kind of property they are. Okay. And there are various different types of property. Okay. And then there are specific uses that property can be used for. Okay. According to what that code is. And according to that code, there are various things that our government basically says you can use that property for. And this is basically protection of citizens at the end of the day. Okay. You don't want, having a normal residential unit, okay, inside a suburb, doing something that is potentially dangerous, potentially toxic to many people in that area. Okay. It can affect everyone around that particular area. You don't want someone running a nuclear power plant in the middle of a residential area. And this is why we have certain codes, and those codes need to be adhered to. Okay. And part of that is there are simple, residential rights, which is just a property. There's a family living on it, and there'll be a limitation on how many people live on that property. And then there's business rights, where you can use a business for certain purposes, and there are requirements for that. Okay. Now, what the writer says is that this is a residential property. It doesn't have business rights. Okay. Now, the assumption that the agent has made is, well, there are other properties in the area that are conducting businesses that are similar, and so this shouldn't be a problem. And unfortunately, that's an assumption that shouldn't be made by the agent. Just because a particular property has a certain right and has been registered a certain way does not mean that your property is the same or would even be entitled the same rights in the circumstances. Okay, you could be a property right next door to someone else, and perhaps they have, residential 2 rights, which allows them to elevate the residential space, whereas you have residential 1, which would not allow you to build any higher than a double story in the circumstances. And it comes down to what is registered on that particular property. You cannot just assume because there's perhaps a school across from you that you would be able to run a school in your residential property right across from the school. That's unfortunately not how it works. So that is the big problem I see here. I know the question is about lease agreements, but this is the far more important thing for me in respect of this particular question. What I would suggest, if as the agent, you need to speak to the owner of the particular property. I know landlords, want tenants in properties, and especially if you're a landlord with a residential property and a business wants to come into your residential property and operate their business from there, it's probably the sweetest deal you've ever seen, because they're probably going to pay a little bit more because they're actually running a business from the particular property. But be warned, if you are the owner of a particular property and you are not complying with municipal bylaws, okay, and you are using your property for a purpose for which it cannot be used, you are the ultimate one responsible. When the municipality comes forward and says you have to rectify the property, you are the one that has to do it, not your tenants, okay? And you can't go to the tenants and say, listen, you're now in breach of anything, because they're not breaching the lease potentially. Maybe they're paying their rental, maybe they're doing exactly what they said they would do in terms of the lease agreement. You are the one who is in trouble with the municipality and the one who's ultimately responsible. So you've got to be very careful. You can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you've entered into an agreement which you're not complying with your code for your particular property. So your question is really, do I use a commercial lease? Do I use a residential lease in the circumstance? My answer is really that's a secondary question. Your first thing you need to look at is you're probably it looks like you're renting to a person that actually can't use that property in any event. You should absolutely be using a residential lease if you're renting out a residential property. But more importantly, you should be renting out your residential property for a tenant that is going to use it for residential purpose. And then obviously the question of which lease agreement do I use is really a moot point. Your problem is really you're trying to use the property for the incorrect purpose, which is very dangerous for the landlord in the circumstance.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Nick, for that answer. And thank you to both our viewers for those questions for today. That does bring us to the end of today's 2 episodes. And we'll see everybody again with some questions and answers in a week's time. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.